When you think of useless information, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's the kind of details that slip through the cracks of history, the fragments that scholars dismiss as inconsequential. But in the ancient kingdom of Hyrule, during the legendary Imprisoning War, even the smallest detail carries the weight of destiny. Tonight, we'll explore the forgotten corners of this pivotal conflict, not the grand battles that shaped kingdoms, but the quiet moments, the technical specifications, the development stories that transformed legend into playable reality. Sometimes the most profound truths hide in the details others call useless. In the year 2024, deep within the halls of Koei Tecmo, something unprecedented was taking shape. Not in the established studios where Dynasty Warriors had carved its legacy through countless iterations, but in a newly formed division bearing the deceptively simple name A Studio. Yes, that truly was the name chosen for this venture. 3 letters that would soon carry the responsibility of bringing one of gaming's most sacred conflicts to life. The formation of A Studio represented more than just corporate restructuring. It embodied a philosophy of creative exploration. Yosuke Hayashi, the veteran producer who had guided both the original Hyrule Warriors and its ambitious sequel Age of Calamity, found himself at the helm of this experimental endeavor. His vision was clear yet revolutionary. Create a space where Koei Tecmo could venture into uncharted territories, while allowing their established studios to continue perfecting the formulas that had defined them for decades. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Age of Imprisonment's development lies not in its beginning, but in its dramatic transformation midway through production. The project had initially been conceived for the original Nintendo Switch, that remarkable hybrid console that had redefined portable gaming. Engineers and designers had carefully crafted their systems around the Switch's capabilities, optimizing enemy counts, balancing visual fidelity, and ensuring the epic scale of the Imprisoning War could unfold within those technical constraints. Then came the pivot that would reshape everything. Somewhere in the development cycle, as concept art transformed into playable prototypes, and the ancient battles of Hyrule began taking digital form, the decision was made to transition development to the Nintendo Switch 2. This wasn't merely a matter of moving files from one development kit to another. It represented a fundamental reimagining of what the game could become. According to Hayashi himself, this transition unlocked possibilities that had previously seemed impossible. Frame rates that had been carefully managed suddenly soared to new heights. Battlefields that had been designed to accommodate specific enemy limits could now teem with unprecedented numbers of combatants. The very nature of the Musou experience, that distinctive feeling of one warrior facing impossible odds, evolved into something more visceral, more overwhelming, more true to the legendary scale of the Imprisoning War itself. A lot more fun. Hayashi would later describe this transformation, though those simple words barely capture the technical revolution occurring behind the scenes. Imagine the ancient battlefields of Hyrule, where Zonai constructs clashed with Ganondorf's monstrous hordes, suddenly populated, not with dozens but with hundreds of combatants. Picture the sacred sites where sages made their desperate stands, now rendered with the processing power to truly convey the epic nature of these conflicts. This technical evolution speaks to something deeper about the Musou genre itself and its unique relationship with the Zelda universe. Traditional Zelda games had always focused on the intimate, Link's solitary journey, his personal growth, the quiet moments of discovery that defined the series. But the imprisoning war demanded something different. This was not a tale of one hero's journey, but of civilizations in conflict, of entire peoples rising to face existential threats. The warrior's formula, with its emphasis on large-scale combat and battlefield tactics, provided the perfect vessel for this specific story. Where mainline Zelda games might show the aftermath of great battles through environmental storytelling and ancient ruins, Age of Imprisonment could present the battles themselves in all their chaotic glory. Every swing of a weapon could represent the fate of kingdoms. Every victory could echo across generations. Yet this adaptation required careful consideration of what made Zelda storytelling unique. The series had always possessed a mythic quality, a sense that these events existed in a realm between history and legend. Age of Imprisonment needed to honor that mythic weight while providing the immediate, visceral experience that defined the warrior's experience. The solution lay in treating the gameplay itself as a form of historical recreation, not just button combinations and combo chains, but a means of experiencing the emotional and physical reality of legendary conflicts. The relationship between Age of Imprisonment and its predecessors in the Hyrule Warriors series reveals this careful balance in action. The original Hyrule Warriors had been unabashedly fantastical, mixing characters and timelines from across the Zelda universe in a celebration of the series' history. It was mythology made manifest, a what-if scenario that prioritized spectacle over canonical accuracy. Age of Calamity had marked a different approach, an attempt to tell a specific story from Zelda lore, the fall of Hyrule 100 years before Breath of the Wild. Yet even this more focused narrative had ultimately diverged from established canon, introducing time travel elements that created an alternate timeline. Players experienced not the actual calamity they had learned about in Breath of the Wild, but a version where different choices led to different outcomes. Age of Imprisonment represented yet another evolution in this progression. Here was a warrior's game that promised to be fully canonical, to show events that had actually occurred in the Zelda timeline, rather than parallel possibilities or crossover fantasies. This canonical status carried both opportunity and responsibility. The developers could finally provide definitive answers to questions that had lingered for years, but they also needed to ensure those answers respected the established lore and the expectations of dedicated fans. The technical capabilities of the Switch 2 became crucial to this canonical mission. Previous Warriors games had sometimes struggled to convey the true scale of legendary conflicts due to hardware limitations. Battles that should have involved thousands of combatants might feature dozens. Environments that should have stretched to the horizon might feel constrained and artificial. With enhanced processing power came the ability to create experiences that felt worthy of their legendary subject matter. But perhaps most importantly, the expanded capabilities allowed for greater attention to detail, the kind of seemingly minor elements that could transform a good adaptation into something truly special. Character animations could be more nuanced, allowing subtle emotional moments between the spectacular combat sequences. Environmental details could be richer, helping to convey the cultural and historical context of each battle. Sound design could layer multiple elements without compression, creating audio landscapes that immersed players in the ancient world. These technical considerations might seem like useless information to casual observers, but they represent the foundation upon which legendary experiences are built. Every frame rate improvement, every additional enemy on screen, every enhanced visual effect served the greater purpose of making the imprisoning war feel real, immediate, and worthy of its place in Zelda history. As all ADA Studio prepared to unveil their creation to the world, they carried with them not just the weight of technical achievement, but the responsibility of canonical storytelling. The imprisoning war had waited thousands of years to be fully told. Through the marriage of Musou's spectacle and enhanced hardware capabilities, that ancient conflict was finally ready to emerge from legend into reality, inviting players to experience firsthand the moments that had shaped the very foundations of Hyrule itself. In the vast tapestry of Hyrule's history, few conflicts have remained as shrouded in mystery as the imprisoning war. For generations, this ancient struggle existed more as whispered legend than documented fact, a foundational myth that scholars could reference but never truly understand. The war's very name carried weight, not the battle of this or the siege of that, but simply the imprisoning war, as if no other descriptor could capture its significance to the kingdom's identity. Before the revelations brought forth by Tears of the Kingdom, the imprisoning war lived primarily in fragments scattered across dusty tomes and half-remembered songs. Historians spoke of it in reverent tones, acknowledging its importance while admitting their ignorance of its details. They knew it had something to do with Ganondorf's rise to power, something about ancient sages and a great ceiling, but the specifics remained frustratingly elusive. It was the kind of historical gap that breeds speculation, where the absence of facts creates space for mythology to flourish. The war's legendary status stemmed partly from its apparent impossibility to research. Unlike other conflicts in Hyrule's history, which left behind ruins that could be explored, artifacts that could be studied, and monuments that could be deciphered, the imprisoning war seemed to have occurred in a time so remote that almost all evidence had been lost to the ages. Scholars could point to certain ancient structures and suggest they might date to that era, but definitive proof remained elusive. This historical vacuum created a unique situation in Zelda lore. The imprisoning war was simultaneously one of the most important events in Hyrule's history and one of the least understood. It served as the foundation for everything that came after: the establishment of the kingdom, the creation of the royal bloodline, the first great defeat of evil. Yet its details remained locked away in the distant past. Then came Tears of the Kingdom, and with it, Princess Zelda's remarkable journey through time. Suddenly, players found themselves witnessing fragments of this legendary conflict through her eyes. The game's memory sequences offered tantalizing glimpses of Rauru and Sonia, of ancient sages and cosmic betrayals, of the very moments when Hyrule's destiny was forged. Yet even these revelations felt incomplete, like looking at a vast mural through a series of keyholes. What Tears of the Kingdom revealed was both illuminating and frustrating. Players learned that the imprisoning war had been fought not by nameless ancient heroes, but by specific individuals with distinct personalities and motivations. Rauru emerged not as a distant mythological figure, but as a complex leader struggling with the weight of kingship. Sonia became more than just a name in genealogical records. She was a partner, a ruler, and ultimately a tragic victim of cosmic ambition. The flashbacks showed the war's catalyst with shocking clarity. Ganondorf's calculated assassination of Queen Sonia during a moment of supposed peace. The memory sequences captured the horror of that betrayal and the way trust shattered in an instant, transforming a diplomatic ceremony into the first act of a cosmic war. Players witnessed the exact moment when Ganondorf claimed Sonia's secret stone, watched his transformation into the Demon King, and saw the birth of a conflict that would echo across millennia. Yet for every answer Tears of the Kingdom provided, it seemed to raise two new questions. The memory sequences showed key moments, but left vast gaps between them. How had the war actually been fought? What battles had determined its course? How had the individual sages come to join Rauru's cause? What had daily life been like for ordinary people caught in this cosmic conflict? The game painted in broad strokes, leaving the details to imagination. This is where the historical significance of the imprisoning war becomes truly profound. This was not merely another conflict between good and evil, but the foundational struggle that established the very nature of Hyrule itself. When Rauru and Sonia founded their kingdom, they were not simply claiming territory or establishing governance. They were creating something unprecedented in the land's history. The Zonai represented something entirely new to the peoples of ancient Hyrule. Here was a civilization that combined advanced technology with profound spiritual understanding, beings who could harness the power of secret stones while constructing marvels of engineering. Their arrival marked the beginning of a new age, one where the scattered tribes and peoples of the land could unite under a common banner and shared purpose. But the founding of Hyrule also represented a fundamental shift in the cosmic balance. The Zonai brought with them not just technology and wisdom, but the secret stones themselves, artifacts of such power that they could amplify magical abilities to godlike levels. The concentration of such power in the hands of benevolent rulers created unprecedented opportunities for peace and prosperity, but it also attracted the attention of those who would abuse such might. Ganondorf's role in this cosmic drama extends beyond simple villainy. As the leader of the Gerudo, he represented an entire people who had developed their own sophisticated culture independent of Zonai influence. His initial decision to kneel before Rauru was not just personal calculation, but a choice that affected his entire tribe. The tragedy of the imprisoning war lies partly in how it forced the Gerudo to choose between loyalty to their traditional leader and allegiance to a new order that promised greater prosperity. The secret stones themselves served as both the war's greatest asset and its most dangerous liability. These mysterious artifacts, with their ability to dramatically amplify their wielder's natural abilities, represented the pinnacle of Zonai technology and spiritual understanding. In the hands of the righteous sages, they became tools of protection and healing. Under Ganondorf's corrupted influence, they transformed into instruments of domination and destruction. The very nature of the secret stones raises profound questions about power and responsibility. How had the Zonai developed such artifacts? What safeguards had they originally implemented to prevent their misuse? The stones. Existence suggests a level of technological and spiritual achievement that surpassed anything seen in Hyrule before or since, making the Zonai's apparent extinction all the more mysterious and tragic. Ganondorf's transformation into the Demon King represents one of the most dramatic moments in all of Zelda lore. This was not a gradual corruption or a slow descent into darkness, but an immediate and total transformation powered by stolen divine artifacts. The moment Sonia's secret stone touched his forehead, Ganondorf ceased to be merely a powerful Gerudo king and became something far more dangerous, a being whose very existence threatened the cosmic order. The psychological impact of this transformation cannot be understated. Those who witnessed it, Rauru, the sages, the assembled crowds, saw with their own eyes how quickly divine power could be perverted to serve destructive ends. The trauma of that moment would have echoed through every subsequent decision made during the war, coloring every strategy with the knowledge that their enemy was no longer bound by mortal limitations. The war that followed Ganondorf's transformation was unlike anything Hyrule had seen before or would see again. This was not a conflict between armies or even between kingdoms, but between cosmic forces representing order and chaos, creation and destruction, hope and despair. The stakes could not have been higher. Failure would mean not just the fall of a government, but the corruption of the very foundations of reality itself. Yet even in the face of such overwhelming threat, the people of ancient Hyrule rose to meet the challenge. The sages who joined Rauru's cause were not professional soldiers or career politicians, but leaders who understood that some moments in history demand everything from those who live through them. Each brought their own people's strength to the conflict, transforming a desperate defensive action into a coordinated resistance capable of matching divine power with divine power. The imprisoning war's conclusion, with Ganondorf's sealing rather than destruction, speaks to both the conflict's intensity and its ultimate tragedy. Even with all their combined might, the forces of light could not completely defeat the Demon King. The best they could achieve was containment, a temporary victory that would hold for thousands of years, but ultimately proved impermanent. In a sense, the imprisoning war never truly ended. It merely paused, waiting for the conditions that would allow its final resolution. This historical context makes Age of Imprisonment's canonical status all the more significant. For the first time, players will experience not just glimpses or fragments of this foundational conflict, but its full scope and complexity. Every battle fought, every alliance forged, every sacrifice made during those desperate days will finally receive the attention and detail it deserves, transforming legend into living history and allowing us to understand how the very foundations of Hyrule were laid in the crucible of cosmic war. In the ancient halls of Hyrule's founding, 7 figures stood as pillars against the encroaching darkness, each carrying the weight of their people's hopes and the power to reshape destiny itself. These were the 7 sages of the imprisoning war, not merely warriors or politicians, but living embodiments of the civilizations they represented, chosen by fate and forged by necessity into the guardians of a nascent kingdom. At the center of this legendary assembly stood Rauru, the last king of the Zonai, and perhaps the most complex ruler in all of Hyrule's history. Unlike the distant godlike figure that later generations would remember, Rauru was a leader caught between worlds, the inheritor of an ancient civilization's wisdom and the founder of something entirely new. His bearing spoke of millennia of Zonai knowledge, yet his eyes carried the weight of being possibly the last of his kind to walk among the living. Rauru's approach to leadership reflected this duality. He possessed the technological mastery of his ancestors, capable of constructing shrines that would endure for thousands of years, and wielding secret stone power with precision that bordered on the divine. Yet he also understood the delicate art of diplomacy, the need to unite disparate peoples under a common cause without erasing their individual identities. His very existence served as a bridge between the mythical past and the uncertain future. The king's relationship with power was perhaps his most defining characteristic. Where lesser leaders might have used Zonai technology to dominate, Rauru chose to share it. His decision to distribute secret stones to the other sages represented not just military strategy, but a philosophical statement about the nature of authority itself. True power, Rauru understood, was not hoarded, but multiplied through trust and shared purpose. Yet beneath this wisdom lay a profound loneliness. As the last male Zonai, Rauru carried the weight of an entire civilization's legacy upon his shoulders. Every decision he made was not just for the present moment, but for the preservation of knowledge and culture that would otherwise die with him. This burden manifested in his meticulous construction of shrines and temples, each one a repository of Zonai wisdom designed to guide future generations long after its creator had passed into legend. Beside Rauru stood Queen Sonia, whose tragic fate would become the catalyst for the war's most desperate phase. Yet to remember Sonia only for her death would be to diminish the profound impact she had on both the kingdom's founding and the development of its spiritual traditions. As the last female Zonai, she brought to the royal partnership not just political alliance, but a deep understanding of time magic that would prove crucial to Hyrule's eventual survival. Sonia's mastery of temporal manipulation represented one of the most sophisticated applications of Zonai power ever recorded. Her ability to perceive the flow of time itself, to sense disturbances in the cosmic order, made her an invaluable advisor in matters both mystical and mundane. It was Sonia who first detected the subtle wrongness in Ganondorf's presence, though even her considerable powers could not penetrate the full depth of his deception. The Queen's relationship with her adopted daughter Zelda revealed another facet of her character, the nurturing wisdom that looked beyond bloodlines to recognize kindred spirits. When the time-displaced princess arrived in their court, Sonia immediately understood both the girl's true nature and her incredible potential. The bond they formed transcended the normal relationship between ruler and subject, becoming instead a connection between kindred souls, separated by millennia, but united by purpose. Sonia's assassination marked not just a personal tragedy, but the moment when the imprisoning war transformed from political conflict into cosmic struggle. Her death shattered the delicate balance that had held Ganondorf's ambitions in check, unleashing forces that would require every remaining sage to contain. Yet even in death, Sonia's influence continued through the bloodline she and Rauru established, a genetic legacy that would carry Zonai wisdom into the distant future. Among the mortal sages, Agriston the Goron represented the marriage of intellectual curiosity with unshakable determination. Unlike the stereotypical image of Goron culture as purely physical, Agriston embodied his people's deeper traditions of craftsmanship and geological wisdom. His calm demeanor masked a brilliant tactical mind capable of seeing patterns and connections that others missed, making him invaluable in the complex strategic calculations that defined the war's later phases. Agristan's worldly nature stemmed from his people's unique relationship with Hyrule's underground systems. The Gorons had always been miners and metalworkers, but under Agristan's leadership, they became something more. Geological engineers capable of reshaping battlefields and creating defensive positions that could withstand even demonic assault. His understanding of stone and earth extended beyond mere physical properties to encompass the spiritual significance of Hyrule's foundations themselves. The Goron chief's intellectual approach to warfare proved crucial in countering Ganondorf's overwhelming physical power. Where brute force failed, Agristan's careful analysis of structural weaknesses and environmental advantages created opportunities for the smaller sage forces to achieve tactical victories. His ability to think beyond the immediate moment, to consider the long-term consequences of each strategic decision, helped ensure that the war's outcomes would favor the forces of light even when individual battles seemed lost. Yet perhaps Agristan's greatest contribution lay in his unwavering loyalty to his companions. Goron. Culture had always valued steadfastness, but Agristan elevated this trait to an art form. When darker moments threatened to break the sage's resolve, it was often Agristan's quiet confidence that reminded them of their shared purpose. His presence served as an anchor, a reminder that some values were worth defending regardless of the cost. The seas and rivers of ancient Hyrule found their champion in Qua, the Zora Queen, whose courage became legendary even among a people known for their warrior traditions. Unlike later Zora rulers, who would focus primarily on their domain's aquatic territories, Qua understood that her people's survival depended on the stability of the entire kingdom. Her decision to commit Zora forces to land-based conflicts represented a strategic vision that transcended traditional territorial boundaries. Qua's fighting style reflected the fluid nature of her element. Where other sages might rely on overwhelming force or defensive positioning, the Zora Queen employed mobility and adaptability as her primary weapons. Her ability to read the flow of battle, to anticipate enemy movements and respond with precision strikes, made her a formidable opponent, despite facing enemies who vastly outweighed her in raw power. The Queen's inspirational leadership extended beyond mere tactical considerations to encompass the emotional and spiritual needs of her people. Zora culture had always been deeply connected to the natural world, and Qua helped her subjects understand the cosmic significance of their struggle. Under her guidance, the defense of Hyrule became not just a political necessity, but a sacred duty to preserve the natural order itself. Qua's valor in the face of impossible odds became a defining characteristic of Zora participation in the war. Time and again, she led her people into battles where victory seemed impossible, yet through sheer determination and tactical brilliance, they achieved outcomes that defied all reasonable expectation. Her example would inspire generations of Zora warriors, establishing traditions of courage and sacrifice that would endure long after the imprisoning war had passed into legend. High above the battlefield, Rafika commanded the skies with a combination of quick wit and strategic acumen that made the Rito invaluable allies in the sage's desperate campaign. His aloof demeanor, which some mistook for indifference, actually masked a deeply analytical mind, constantly evaluating threats and opportunities from his aerial perspective. The Rito leader's ability to see the bigger picture, literally and figuratively, provided the sages with intelligence advantages that proved crucial. encountering Ganondorf's seemingly overwhelming forces. Rafika's leadership style reflected the independent nature of Rito culture while adapting to the collaborative demands of the Sage Alliance. He understood that his people's natural inclination toward individual achievement needed to be channeled into coordinated group efforts if they were to have any hope of success against the Demon King's armies. His challenge lay in maintaining Rito identity and fighting techniques while integrating them into a larger strategic framework. The considerate nature that lay beneath Rafika's outward aloofness became apparent in his treatment of both allies and subordinates. He possessed an uncanny ability to understand what each individual needed to perform at their best, whether that was encouragement, challenge, or simply the space to work through their own doubts and fears. This emotional intelligence made him not just an effective military commander, but a crucial mediator when tensions arose between the various Sage factions. Rafika's steadfast loyalty to the Alliance, despite his people's traditional independence, demonstrated the depth of his commitment to the cause. The Rito had always been somewhat apart from the other peoples of Hyrule, their aerial lifestyle creating natural barriers to close cooperation. Yet, under Rafika's leadership, they became integral to the Sage's success, proving that even the most independent spirits could unite when faced with existential threat. Perhaps no Sage faced a more agonizing position than Artie, the Gerudo leader whose very existence embodied the tragic divisions that the imprisoning war created within her people. Bound by ancient Gerudo law to serve Ganondorf as their king, yet blessed with the compassion and moral clarity to recognize his evil nature, Artie found herself caught between duty and conscience in a way that would have destroyed lesser souls. The Gerudo sage's internal struggle reflected the broader tensions within her people during this tumultuous period. For generations, the Gerudo had developed their own sophisticated culture and governance systems, with traditions that emphasized both loyalty to leadership and responsibility to the tribe's welfare. Ganondorf's transformation into the Demon King forced every Gerudo to choose between these competing values, creating divisions that would echo through their society for millennia to come. Artie's compassionate leadership style stood in stark contrast to Ganondorf's increasingly tyrannical approach. Where the Demon King demanded absolute obedience through fear and intimidation, Artie inspired loyalty through genuine care for her people's well-being. Her ability to see beyond immediate political considerations, to understand the long-term consequences of various choices, made her a natural leader for those Gerudo who sought an alternative to their king's dark path. The weight of turning against Ganondorf cannot be understated when considering Artie's character development throughout the war. Gerudo culture had always emphasized honor and loyalty, making betrayal of one's king a fundamental violation of everything she had been taught to value. Yet Artie's moral courage ultimately transcended cultural conditioning, allowing her to choose the harder path of resistance, rather than the easier route of continued obedience to evil. In the quieter moments between battles and strategy sessions, Linealia moved through the royal court with an efficiency that belied her easygoing demeanor. As Princess Zelda's chamberlain, she occupied a unique position within the Sage hierarchy, neither a military commander nor a political leader, but something perhaps more valuable. The person who made everything else possible through careful attention to countless, seemingly minor details. Linnalia's ability to get things done had made her indispensable to Rauru long before the war began. In the complex process of founding a kingdom, success often depended not on grand gestures or dramatic moments, but on the quiet competence of those who ensured that supplies reached their destinations, that messages arrived at their intended recipients, and that the countless small tasks necessary for civilization's functioning were completed with precision and care. Her relationship with the time-displaced Zelda added layers of complexity to Linnalia's role that she handled with characteristic grace. Serving as chamberlain to a princess who possessed knowledge of the future while maintaining the emotional support necessary for someone displaced from everything they had ever known required a delicate balance of respect, affection, and professional discretion. Rauru's trust in Linnalia spoke to both her competence and her character. In the dangerous political environment surrounding the war's outbreak, the king needed allies he could trust absolutely, people whose loyalty was beyond question and whose judgment could be relied upon even in the most chaotic circumstances. Linnalia's elevation to sage status represented not just recognition of her administrative skills, but acknowledgement of her moral authority and emotional wisdom. Together, these 7 figures represented more than just military leadership. They embodied the very soul of ancient Hyrule's founding principles. Each brought their people's greatest strengths to the alliance, while transcending cultural boundaries to create something unprecedented in the land's history. Their individual stories of sacrifice, growth, and unwavering commitment would become the foundation upon which all future generations of Hyruleans would build their understanding of heroism and duty. The symbolic weight of their unity cannot be overstated. In an age when tribal and cultural divisions had defined the political landscape for countless generations, the sages proved that cooperation across traditional boundaries was not just possible, but necessary for survival in the face of cosmic threat. Their example would inspire future leaders for millennia, establishing the principle that true strength came not from domination, but from the willing alliance of free peoples united in common cause. In all the annals of scholarly pursuit, few figures embody the spirit of intellectual curiosity, quite like Princess Zelda of the Wild Era. Long before fate would thrust her backward through the streams of time, she had established herself as perhaps the most dedicated researcher of ancient mysteries in Hyrule's recorded history. Her transformation from curious princess to living witness of the very events she had spent years studying represents one of the most extraordinary journeys in the kingdom's long chronicle of remarkable tales. The princess who would eventually walk among the founders of Hyrule had begun her scholarly journey in the ruins scattered across her contemporary kingdom. While others saw only crumbling stones and weathered carvings, Zelda perceived questions waiting to be answered, mysteries begging to be unraveled. Her establishment of the Zonai survey team represented more than mere academic interest. It was a systematic attempt to reconstruct an entire lost civilization from fragments and whispers. Every expedition into ancient ruins, every careful documentation of mysterious symbols, every hypothesis about vanished peoples had been preparing Zelda for a destiny she could never have imagined. The hours spent poring over architectural details, the careful measurements of technological artifacts, the endless speculation about the daily lives of the Zonai. All of this scholarly groundwork would prove invaluable when she found herself not studying these people, but living among them. The irony of Zelda's situation cannot be overstated. For years, she had been the kingdom's foremost Zonai theorist, developing elaborate hypotheses about their origins, their technology, their relationship with the surface peoples of ancient Hyrule. She had constructed careful timelines based on archaeological evidence, proposed explanations for their apparent disappearance, and debated with fellow scholars about the true nature of their advanced civilization. Now, suddenly, she found herself in a position to simply ask Rauru and Mineru directly. Yet this transition from theorist to eyewitness brought unexpected complications. The Zonai she encountered in the past were not the mythological figures of her research, but complex individuals with their own limitations, uncertainties, and gaps in knowledge. Rauru himself possessed profound wisdom about certain aspects of his civilization, but remained surprisingly ignorant about others. Mineru, despite her vast libraries and technological mastery, had apparently never fully explored the depths that Zelda knew so well from her future wanderings. This disconnect between scholarly expectation and lived reality forced Zelda to recalibrate her entire understanding of how knowledge is preserved and lost across generations. The Zonai she had studied were the products of countless retellings, their stories filtered through millennia of legend and interpretation. The Zonai she now lived among were people grappling with immediate challenges, unaware of how history would remember them or which of their achievements would endure. Zelda's unique position as a time traveler created unprecedented opportunities for historical verification. Questions that had puzzled scholars for generations could now be answered through direct observation. The true purpose of certain ancient structures, the actual methods used in Zonai construction, the real relationships between different technological systems, all of these mysteries became accessible through careful attention to daily life in the ancient court. Yet this privileged access to historical truth came with its own burden of responsibility. Zelda found herself serving not just as a witness, but as a potential chronicler, someone whose future knowledge could help preserve important details that might otherwise be lost. Her scholarly training became invaluable in this role, providing her with the analytical frameworks necessary to identify which observations would prove most significant for future understanding. The emotional weight of her temporal displacement manifested in ways both subtle and profound. Watching historical figures she had spent years studying revealed them to be not distant legends, but people with hopes, fears, and daily concerns remarkably similar to her own. Sonia's kindness toward a displaced stranger, Rauru's patient explanations of Zonai technology, the individual personalities of the sages, all of these human details added layers of complexity to figures who had previously existed only as names in ancient records. Perhaps most poignantly, Zelda's knowledge of the future cast shadows over every moment of happiness or triumph she witnessed. When she watched Sonia and Rauru planning for their kingdom's future, she knew the tragic fate that awaited the queen. When she observed the sages forging their alliances, she understood the ultimate cost of their victory. This foreknowledge transformed her from passive observer into a person carrying the weight of destiny itself. The princess's relationships with the ancient court members evolved beyond mere historical interest into genuine emotional connections. Her bond with Sonia grew from initial mentor-student dynamics into something approaching familial affection. The queen's nurturing wisdom provided comfort to a displaced soul, while Zelda's insights from the future offered perspectives that enriched the ancient ruler's understanding of her own time. Her interactions with Rauru revealed the complexity of living among people whose future legacy she knew intimately. The king, who had become a revered figure in future Hyrule, proved to be a thoughtful but sometimes uncertain leader, someone who made decisions based on incomplete information and hoped for the best. Seeing his humanity behind the mythological status added depth to Zelda's appreciation of both his achievements and his limitations. The other sages presented their own fascinating contrasts between historical reputation and lived reality. Agristan's intellectual curiosity, Qua's inspiring courage, Rafika's hidden depths beneath apparent aloofness, Artie's agonizing moral struggles, Linalia's quiet competence. Each relationship provided Zelda with insights that no amount of archaeological research could have revealed. Her scholarly approach to this unprecedented situation manifested in careful mental cataloging of details that might prove historically significant. The daily routines of ancient court life, the specific methods used in zonai crafting, the actual words spoken during important conversations, all of these observations were filed away in her memory as potential contributions to future understanding of this crucial period. Yet Zelda's influence on the past extended beyond mere observation. Her future knowledge, carefully shared, could provide insights that proved valuable to the ancient kingdom's development. Her understanding of certain technological principles gained from studying zonai ruins sometimes allowed her to offer suggestions that accelerated problem-solving or prevented costly mistakes. The philosophical implications of her situation occupied much of Zelda's contemplative time. She was simultaneously living history and remembering the future, experiencing events firsthand while knowing their ultimate consequences. This temporal duality created a unique perspective on the nature of destiny, causation, and the relationship between individual choices and historical outcomes. Her dreams became particularly complex during this period, mixing memories of her original timeline with experiences from the ancient past. Sometimes she would wake uncertain which era she truly belonged to, whether her life in the future kingdom was the dream or the reality. These moments of temporal displacement within displacement added psychological layers to an already extraordinary situation. The gradual integration of Zelda into ancient court life reflected both her adaptability and the welcoming nature of the zonai leadership. Despite the obvious anomaly of her presence, she found herself assigned meaningful roles that utilized her unique knowledge and skills. Her contributions to strategic planning, her insights into enemy movements based on future archaeological evidence, her understanding of geographical features that would prove crucial in the war, all of these became valuable assets to the Sage Alliance. Perhaps most significantly, Zelda's presence served as a bridge between eras, a living link connecting the ancient founders of Hyrule with their distant descendants. Through her, Rauru and Sonia could glimpse the legacy of their choices, understanding how their actions would echo across millennia. This knowledge provided both comfort and additional motivation during the war's darkest moments. The ultimate tragedy of Zelda's temporal journey lay in her eventual return to her own era, leaving behind not just historical subjects, but friends, mentors, and adopted family members whose company she had treasured. The scholarly distance that had originally defined her relationship with the Zonai had dissolved into genuine affection, making her departure not just a return home, but a farewell to people she had grown to love. Her experience living among the ancient sages would forever change how Zelda approached both scholarship and leadership in her own time. The theoretical had become personal, the historical had become lived experience, and the legendary had revealed itself to be profoundly, beautifully human. Through her unique journey, the ultimate Zonai theorist had discovered that the greatest truths about the past could only be learned by becoming part of it. Among all the mysteries that have captivated scholars throughout Hyrule's long history, none have proven more enigmatic than the origins and ultimate fate of the Zonai civilization. These questions, which had haunted researchers for generations, take on new urgency and possibility within Age of Imprisonment, where Princess Zelda's unprecedented access to living Zonai might finally provide answers that archaeological evidence alone could never reveal. The fundamental question of Zonai origins has spawned countless theories over the centuries, each attempting to explain how such an advanced civilization could have appeared seemingly from nowhere. The most persistent speculation centered on their otherworldly nature. Were they sky people who descended from celestial realms, travelers from distant planets who brought their technology across the void of space, or perhaps something even stranger? Beings from dimensions beyond normal comprehension. Evidence supporting the extraterrestrial theory had accumulated steadily through careful analysis of Zonai technology and architectural styles. Their mastery of materials unknown to surface dwellers, their apparent ability to manipulate fundamental forces of physics, their construction techniques that seemed to defy conventional engineering limitations. All of these suggested knowledge gained from sources beyond Hyrule's terrestrial boundaries. Some scholars had pointed to the Zonai's apparent comfort with both sky islands and underground depths as further evidence of their alien nature, proposing that beings accustomed to the vacuum of space might naturally gravitate toward environments that challenged surface-dwelling peoples. The mining theory had gained particular traction among those who studied Zonai presence in the depths. Vast excavation sites throughout the underground suggested industrial operations on a scale that dwarfed anything attempted by surface civilizations. The careful extraction of zonite, that mysterious substance that powered so much of their technology, implied not casual resource gathering, but systematic harvesting, conducted with specific purposes in mind. Perhaps the Zonai had indeed come to Hyrule as cosmic miners, drawn by deposits of materials unavailable elsewhere in their travels through the stars. Yet Age of Imprisonment's revelations about Rauru and Mineru's knowledge, or precisely their lack thereof, cast these extraterrestrial theories into unexpected shadow. The profound gaps in their understanding of their own people's history suggested that if the Zonai were indeed cosmic travelers, that origin had been forgotten even by their final survivors. Rauru's reliance on ancient legends rather than direct historical knowledge implied that whatever truth lay behind Zonai, origins had been lost to time even within their own cultural memory. This historical amnesia raises fascinating questions about the nature of civilizational memory and the ways knowledge can be preserved or lost across generations. How had a people advanced enough to traverse space or dimensions allowed their own origin story to fade into myth? What catastrophic events or gradual cultural shifts had severed the connection between the last Zonai and their ancestral past. The revelation that Mineru had barely explored the depths by the time of Zelda's arrival proved particularly shocking to those familiar with her apparent mastery of underground systems in the distant future. This suggests that Zonai engagement with the depths represented not ancient tradition, but relatively recent exploration, perhaps driven by immediate needs rather than inherited knowledge. The implications are staggering. If even Mineru, the most scholarly of the surviving Zonai, was unfamiliar with extensive underground operations, what had happened to disconnect them from what appeared to be major centers of their civilization? The relationship between the Zonai and the various peoples of ancient Hyrule represents another layer of mystery that Age of Imprisonment might finally illuminate. For years, scholars had debated whether the Zonai arrival represented peaceful contact or technological conquest, whether their advanced capabilities had been shared freely or imposed through superior force. The evidence remained frustratingly ambiguous, with some archaeological sites suggesting harmonious cooperation, while others hinted at more complex power dynamics. The conquest theory had drawn support from the obvious technological disparities between Zonai capabilities and those of surface peoples. A civilization capable of constructing floating islands and underground megastructures would have possessed overwhelming advantages in any conflict with groups limited to traditional materials and methods. The very existence of Hyrule as a unified kingdom under Zonai leadership could be interpreted as evidence of technological dominance used to impose political control. Yet the legends preserved by surface peoples suggested a different narrative, one of willing alliance and mutual benefit, rather than subjugation. Stories passed down through Goron, Zora, Rito, and Gerudo traditions spoke of the Zonai as benevolent teachers who shared their knowledge freely, partners in building something greater than any single people could achieve alone. These cultural memories implied that whatever integration had occurred between Zonai and surface dwellers had been accomplished through diplomacy rather than force. The first encounters between sages and Zonai leadership in Age of Imprisonment promised to shed crucial light on these competing interpretations. The apparent tension in Rauru's initial meeting with the Gerudo sage suggests that not all relationships began smoothly, that the process of building the sage alliance required overcoming significant cultural and political obstacles. Observing how these alliances developed, whether through negotiation, demonstration of mutual benefit, or more complex processes, could finally resolve decades of scholarly debate about Zonai integration methods. The mystery of Zonai relationship with the depths extends beyond mere exploration into fundamental questions about their civilization's structure and purpose. The vast mining operations, the sacred power sites, the mysterious beacons that enhanced light power. All of these suggest that underground systems were not peripheral to Zonai civilization, but central to their technological and spiritual practices. Yet if this was true, how had Mineru become so disconnected from these crucial underground networks? The references to ruins in the depths, structures that Mineru recognized as belonging to their ancestors, imply a temporal layering of Zonai presence that defies simple explanation. Were there multiple waves of Zonai settlement, different eras of expansion and retreat that left archaeological puzzles for even their own descendants? The underground statues depicting unknown species add another dimension to this mystery, suggesting that Zonai interaction with the depths involved encounters with beings whose very existence has been forgotten by history. These mysterious species represented in the mining statues pose perhaps the most intriguing questions of all. Were they the Lomé, those enigmatic figures whose labyrinths dotted the landscape in later eras? Could they have been the Magma, those underground dwellers known from ancient texts but never encountered in recorded history? Or did they represent something entirely unknown, a people whose interaction with the Zonai was so significant that it warranted permanent artistic commemoration, yet so distant that even their identity had been lost? The possibility that these unknown beings might appear in Age of Imprisonment, whether through direct encounter or explanatory cutscenes, represents one of the most exciting prospects for lore revelation. Minoru's potential recognition of their forms could provide the missing link between various mysterious elements scattered throughout Hyrule's archaeological record, finally explaining the purpose behind structures and artifacts that had puzzled researchers for generations. Perhaps the most profound mystery surrounding the Zonai concerns their apparent extinction despite technological capabilities that should have made them virtually invulnerable to conventional threats. A civilization capable of constructing permanent sky islands, manipulating time itself, and creating self-maintaining technological systems should have been able to survive almost any conceivable catastrophe. Yet somehow, they had dwindled to just 2 survivors by the time of the imprisoning war. The internal collapse theory gains credibility when considering the sheer scope of Zonai power. A people capable of such technological miracles might have faced challenges that transcended physical threats, perhaps philosophical divisions about the proper use of their abilities, spiritual crises brought on by their godlike capabilities, or simple demographic problems that technology could not solve. The concentration of such power in relatively few individuals might have made their civilization inherently unstable, vulnerable to internal conflicts that could devastate their entire society. The speculation about Zonai attempts to achieve immortality through technological means adds another layer to this mystery. If the surviving Zonai represented the last remnants of a people desperately seeking to preserve their civilization through artificial means, it would explain both their technological focus and their ultimate failure. The construct soldiers that served them might represent early experiments in consciousness transfer, attempts to preserve Zonai minds in artificial bodies that could outlast biological limitations. The draconification theory, though speculative, offers a haunting possibility for Zonai extinction. If the survivors of some great catastrophe had chosen to transform themselves into eternal dragons rather than face the slow death of their civilization, it would represent both ultimate achievement and ultimate tragedy. The few who remained in mortal form, Rauru and Mineru, might have been those who chose to preserve their humanity at the cost of eventual death, accepting finite existence over infinite but transformed life. Age of Imprisonment's potential to address these mysteries represents more than mere satisfaction of scholarly curiosity. The questions surrounding Zonai origins, relationships, and fate speak to fundamental themes about civilization, power, and the relationship between technological capability and social stability. Understanding what happened to the Zonai might provide insights relevant to any advanced society, lessons about the challenges that come with great power, and the ways that even the mightiest civilizations can fall. Zelda's role as both scholar and witness makes her the perfect vehicle for exploring these deep mysteries. Her questions, informed by generations of theoretical work but driven by genuine curiosity about the people she has come to know personally, could finally bridge the gap between archaeological speculation and historical truth. Through her eyes, we might finally understand not just what the Zonai accomplished, but who they were as individuals and as a people. The sacred power sites mentioned in connection with underground navigation hint at spiritual dimensions to Zonai civilization that have barely been explored in existing research. These beacons that enhanced light power suggest a sophisticated understanding of metaphysical forces that went far beyond mere technological manipulation. Perhaps the Zonai extinction was not a failure of technology, but a spiritual crisis, a loss of connection to the very forces that had originally empowered their civilization. Whatever revelations Age of Imprisonment might provide about these ancient mysteries, they promise to transform our understanding, not just of Zonai civilization, but of the fundamental forces that shape civilizational rise and fall throughout history. In the depths where light power flows and ancient statues guard forgotten secrets, the answers to millennia-old questions wait to be discovered by those brave enough to seek them in the darkness below. Among the many tragedies that defined the imprisoning war, perhaps none cut deeper into the social fabric of ancient Hyrule than the schism that tore through Gerudo society itself. This was not merely a political disagreement or territorial dispute, but a fundamental rupture in the heart of a proud warrior culture, forcing an entire people to choose between loyalty to their traditional king and allegiance to a moral order that demanded his rejection. The roots of this civil conflict lay in the very nature of Gerudo governance and the unprecedented situation created by Ganondorf's transformation into the Demon King. For generations uncounted, Gerudo society had operated under clearly defined principles of leadership and loyalty. The male born once every century became their king by right of birth, and this position carried with it absolute authority over the tribe's destiny. This system had provided stability and strength, creating a unified warrior culture capable of thriving in the harsh desert environment that would have destroyed less cohesive societies. Yet, the emergence of Ganondorf as the Demon King shattered these traditional frameworks in ways that no amount of cultural precedent could address. The laws and customs that bound the Gerudo to their king had been developed to govern relationships between mortals, not to address the moral implications of serving a being whose very existence threatened the cosmic order. When Ganondorf claimed Sonia's secret stone and transformed before the assembled court, he transcended the normal boundaries of kingship and became something that existing law had never contemplated. The figure of Arti, the Gerudo sage, embodies the impossible position in which this transformation placed the most thoughtful members of her people. Her description as a compassionate leader bound by Gerudo law to serve Ganondorf captures the essential tragedy of the civil war that followed. Here was a woman whose natural inclinations toward justice and mercy placed her in direct conflict with her legal and cultural obligations to obey her king, regardless of his actions. The weight of this conflict becomes apparent in every image we have seen of Artie during the pre-war period. Her expression carries a profound sadness that speaks to the internal struggle between duty and conscience that must have consumed her during those crucial days. This was not the simple sorrow of someone facing difficult choices, but the deeper anguish of a person whose entire worldview was being systematically destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. Artie's position as a leader among the Gerudo, paralleling Naburu's role in the later Ocarina of Time era, suggests that she commanded respect and loyalty from significant portions of her people. This leadership position would have made her choice between Ganondorf and the sages even more agonizing, as she understood that her decision would influence countless others who looked to her for guidance. The responsibility of potentially leading her followers into what could be seen as treasonous rebellion against their legitimate king must have weighed heavily on her conscience. The cultural laws that bound Artie to Ganondorf's service represented more than mere political obligation. They embodied centuries of Gerudo identity and social structure. To break these laws, even in service of a higher moral calling, meant challenging the very foundations of her people's way of life. This was not simply a matter of changing political allegiances, but of fundamentally reimagining what it meant to be Gerudo in a world where their traditional structures had failed to account for cosmic evil. The process by which Artie ultimately chose to join the sages likely represented one of the most painful personal transformations in the entire conflict. The evidence suggests that this was not a sudden conversion, but a gradual recognition that her duty to protect her people transcended her obligation to obey their king. The compassionate nature that defined her character eventually demanded that she prioritize the welfare of the Gerudo tribe over loyalty to a leader whose actions threatened their very survival. When Artie finally broke with Ganondorf, her decision created immediate and lasting divisions within Gerudo society. Those who followed her example found themselves branded as traitors by traditionalists, who maintained that loyalty to the king superseded all other considerations. Meanwhile, those who remained with Ganondorf could be seen by the sage faction as collaborators with evil, despite their adherence to centuries of cultural law and tradition. The archaeological evidence scattered throughout the Gerudo Desert tells a grim story of the consequences that followed this schism. Execution sites and prison complexes that appear to date from this period suggest that the Civil War involved not just military conflict, but systematic persecution of those deemed disloyal by whichever faction held temporary power. The careful analysis of these sites reveals signs of mass executions that speak to the intensity of hatred that the Civil War generated between former kinfolk. The transformation of executed Gerudo loyalists into Gibdos upon Ganondorf's eventual return adds a supernatural dimension to the Civil War's tragedy. These undead warriors, bound eternally to serve the Demon King, represent the ultimate corruption of Gerudo warrior traditions. Where once their strength had protected their people and preserved their independence, now it served only to advance the cause of cosmic destruction. The presence of figures like Twinrova among Ganondorf's followers suggests that his faction included some of the most powerful and influential members of Gerudo society. These dark sorcerers, with their mastery of magical arts that complemented the tribe's martial traditions, would have provided both practical assistance and ideological justification for those Gerudo who chose to remain loyal to their transformed king. Their support helped frame continued allegiance to Ganondorf not as blind obedience, but as preservation of authentic Gerudo values against foreign influence. The strategic implications of the Gerudo Civil War extended far beyond the immediate participants to affect the broader course of the imprisoning war itself. A unified Gerudo tribe under Ganondorf's command would have represented an overwhelming military advantage, combining the natural warrior skills of the desert people with the supernatural powers of their demon king leader. The division of their forces between competing factions significantly reduced this threat, while providing the sages with valuable allies who understood Gerudo tactics and capabilities. Artie's followers brought more than just military strength to the Sage Alliance. They provided crucial intelligence about Ganondorf's methods, weaknesses, and likely strategies. Former members of his inner circle could reveal details about his plans and capabilities that would have been impossible for outsiders to discover. This intelligence advantage may have proven decisive in several key battles, where advanced knowledge of enemy intentions allowed the sages to prepare appropriate countermeasures. The establishment of the Gerudo Queen lineage through Artie's sage status represents one of the most significant long-term consequences of the Civil War. By choosing to side with Rauru and Sonia, she created an alternative power structure that would eventually evolve into the matriarchal system that would characterize Gerudo governance in later eras. This transformation from male kingship to female leadership marked a fundamental shift in Gerudo political culture that can be traced directly to the moral crisis created by Ganondorf's corruption. The parallel between Artie's resistance and Naburu's later defiance of Ganondorf in the Ocarina of Time era suggests that the Civil War established lasting traditions of moral courage within Gerudo culture. The precedent, set by Artie's choice to prioritize justice over blind loyalty, created a template that would inspire future generations of Gerudo leaders when faced with similar moral dilemmas. This cultural evolution from absolute monarchy to principled leadership represents one of the few positive outcomes of an otherwise tragic conflict. The psychological trauma inflicted on individual Gerudo by the Civil War cannot be understated. Families were divided against themselves, with siblings and parents forced to choose between competing visions of honor and duty. The warrior culture that had prized unity and collective strength found itself fragmented by irreconcilable differences about the most fundamental questions of right and wrong. The lasting impact of this division continued to influence Gerudo society long after the imprisoning war had ended. The memory of brother fighting, brother of families torn apart by impossible choices, became part of the tribe's collective trauma. Later generations would inherit not just the political consequences of the Civil War, but the emotional scars left by a conflict that had forced their ancestors to abandon everything they had been taught about loyalty and obedience. The tragic irony of the Gerudo Civil War lies in how it transformed a people known for their unity and strength into a cautionary tale about the destructive power of absolute loyalty. The very qualities that had made them formidable warriors, their discipline, their devotion to hierarchy, their willingness to sacrifice individual desires for collective good, became sources of weakness when their traditional structures failed to provide moral guidance in unprecedented circumstances. Yet, from this tragedy, emerged a new understanding of leadership and responsibility that would serve the Gerudo well in future centuries. Artie's choice to break with tradition, when tradition demanded complicity with evil, established a principle that would guide her descendants. True loyalty sometimes requires the courage to disobey, and authentic leadership demands the wisdom to recognize when established systems have become sources of corruption rather than strength. The civil war that tore through Gerudo society during the Imprisoning War thus represents both an ending and a beginning, the death of an old order that could not adapt to cosmic evil, and the birth of new traditions that would prove more resilient in the face of moral complexity. Through pain and sacrifice, the Gerudo learned that survival sometimes requires transformation, and that the highest loyalty is not to tradition itself, but to the values that tradition was meant to serve. The philosophical foundations of the Musou genre find perhaps their most eloquent expression in the chaos of large-scale warfare, where individual heroism must somehow shine through the overwhelming tide of battle. When applied to the legendary conflicts of Hyrule's ancient past, this gaming philosophy transforms from mere mechanical convenience into profound storytelling necessity, creating experiences that capture the true scope and emotional weight of cosmic war. The essential challenge facing any adaptation of the Imprisoning War lay in translating the mythic scale of these events into interactive experience. Traditional Zelda gameplay, with its focus on careful exploration and intimate puzzle solving, could never convey the desperate urgency of armies clashing across multiple fronts, of entire civilizations hanging in the balance, while heroes fought against impossible odds. The personal journey that defined most Zelda adventures required expansion into something far grander to accommodate the scope of conflicts that determined the fate of kingdoms. Musou combat mechanics, with their emphasis on overwhelming numerical disadvantage overcome through superior skill and determination, provided the perfect framework for expressing the sage's impossible position during the war. Each character becomes not just a warrior, but a force of nature, capable of carving through enemy formations, while maintaining the individual identity and fighting style that reflected their cultural origins and personal philosophy. The character-specific weapon systems in Age of Imprisonment represent more than mere mechanical variety. They embody the diverse traditions and capabilities that each sage brought to the Alliance. Rauru's mastery of Zonai technology manifests in combat through precise energy manipulation and construct integration, reflecting his people's synthesis of spiritual understanding and technological advancement. His fighting style speaks to millennia of Zonai martial tradition, movements that flow with the calculated precision of beings who have transcended the normal limitations of mortal combat. Sonya's temporal manipulation abilities translate into combat patterns that seem to bend the normal flow of battle itself. Her capacity to accelerate her own actions while slowing enemy responses creates moments of devastating precision amid the chaos of large-scale warfare. The tragic irony that such powerful abilities could not protect her from Ganondorf's calculated betrayal adds emotional weight to every demonstration of her combat prowess. Agristan's approach to Musou combat reflects the geological mastery that defines Goron culture at its most sophisticated. His abilities extend beyond mere physical strength to encompass manipulation of the battlefield itself, creating defensive positions and offensive opportunities through careful application of earth-moving techniques. The intellectual component of his character manifests in combat through strategic positioning and environmental awareness that transforms chaotic battles into carefully orchestrated campaigns. The fluid grace of Qua's aquatic-influenced fighting style provides striking contrast to the more rigid approaches of land-based warriors. Her techniques flow like water itself, finding gaps in enemy formations and exploiting weaknesses through mobility rather than overwhelming force. The inspiration she provided to her people translates into combat abilities that seem to energize nearby allies while demoralizing opponents through demonstrations of impossible elegance under pressure. Rafika's aerial perspective grants him unique advantages in the three-dimensional battlefields that characterize the imprisoning war. His ability to analyze enemy movements from above while coordinating with ground-based allies creates tactical opportunities that would be invisible to earth-bound commanders. The apparent aloofness that marks his personality becomes a strength in combat, allowing him to maintain strategic objectivity even in the most emotionally charged encounters. Perhaps no sage faces more complex combat challenges than Artie, whose fighting style must somehow reconcile traditional Gerudo martial arts with her moral opposition to the very king who had shaped those traditions. Her techniques carry the precision and power of desert warrior culture, while being redirected toward purposes that would have seemed unthinkable to previous generations. Every strike represents not just tactical necessity, but personal transformation. The painful process of reimagining what Gerudo's strength could accomplish when guided by conscience rather than blind loyalty. Linalia's combat abilities might initially seem incongruous with her administrative role, yet they reflect the practical reality that survival in the ancient court required more than organizational skills. Her fighting style combines the efficiency that marked her approach to logistics with the protective instincts that made her invaluable to those she served. The quiet competence that characterized her peacetime activities translates into combat effectiveness that surprises enemies who underestimate the warrior potential hidden within apparent civilians. The integration of Zonai equipment into combat systems represents one of Age of Imprisonment's most innovative mechanical achievements. Rather than treating ancient technology as mere power-ups or temporary enhancements, the game allows for deep customization that reflects each character's growing understanding of Zonai capabilities. Players can experiment with different combinations of Zonai devices to create fighting styles that evolve throughout the campaign, mirroring the historical process by which the sages learned to incorporate alien technology into their existing martial traditions. The Sync Strike system transforms cooperative combat from simple mechanical advantage into narrative expression of the bonds that held the Sage Alliance together. These combined attacks represent more than coordinated timing. They embody the trust and understanding that developed between characters who began as strangers but became family through shared struggle. The most devastating sync strikes emerge not from arbitrary button combinations, but from genuine compatibility between characters, whose individual strengths complement each other. Watching Rauru and Sonya execute perfectly coordinated attacks provides glimpses into the deep partnership that defined their rule, their movements synchronized through years of shared leadership and mutual understanding. The tragic knowledge that this partnership would be cut short by Ganondorf's betrayal adds poignancy to every demonstration of their combat harmony. The spectacle of massive army confrontations serves purposes beyond mere visual impressiveness. It communicates the true stakes of the imprisoning war in ways that smaller skirmishes never could. When players guide individual sages through battlefields populated by hundreds of combatants, they experience viscerally the overwhelming nature of the challenges faced by the historical figures. The constant pressure of enemies advancing from all directions creates the same desperate urgency that must have characterized the actual conflicts. Environmental variety across Hyrule's diverse landscapes ensures that combat remains fresh while serving the narrative purpose of showing how the war affected every corner of the ancient kingdom. Surface battles in the familiar fields and forests of Hyrule proper provide grounding in recognizable terrain, while skirmishes among the Sky Islands introduce vertical elements that challenge traditional tactical thinking. The mysterious depths offer perhaps the most unique combat environments, where the interplay between light and darkness creates both strategic opportunities and navigation challenges. Fighting in these underground realms requires careful management of illumination sources while contending with enemies adapted to subterranean warfare. The sacred power sites that enhance light abilities become crucial tactical objectives, transforming environmental exploration into military necessity. The philosophical implications of Musou combat extend beyond mechanical considerations into fundamental questions about the nature of heroism in large-scale conflicts. By allowing individual characters to affect the outcome of massive battles through personal skill and determination, the genre validates the classical notion that extraordinary individuals can shape history through their actions. This theme resonates particularly strongly with Zelda lore, where legendary heroes have always stood against overwhelming odds to preserve hope in dark times. Yet the cooperative elements built into Age of Imprisonment's design acknowledge that even heroes require allies to achieve their greatest victories. The availability of both local and online cooperative play reflects the historical reality that the imprisoning war was won not through individual achievement, but through unprecedented cooperation between diverse peoples and cultures. The technical capabilities that allow for seamless cooperation between players using different hardware generations speaks to the inclusive nature of the Sage Alliance itself. Just as the ancient coalition welcomed participants regardless of their technological sophistication or cultural background, the game's cooperative systems ensure that players can contribute meaningfully regardless of their access to the latest gaming hardware. The button-mashing combat that defines Musou gameplay might seem to oversimplify the complex martial traditions represented by each sage, yet it serves important accessibility purposes that align with the democratic ideals of the Sage Alliance. Players of varying skill levels can contribute meaningfully to cooperative battles, ensuring that the experience of fighting alongside friends mirrors the historical reality of diverse peoples united in common cause. The spectacle of Zonai constructs marching alongside organic warriors, of ancient technology integrated seamlessly with traditional weapons, creates visual metaphors for the cultural synthesis that defined the Sage Alliance. These battles represent not just military conflicts, but the birth pangs of a new civilization, one that would incorporate the best elements of multiple traditions into something greater than the sum of its parts. Through the marriage of Musou mechanics with Zelda storytelling, Age of Imprisonment transforms the button combinations and combo chains that define the genre into expressions of legendary heroism. Every defeated enemy represents a small victory against cosmic evil. Every successful sync strike embodies the power of cooperation, and every hard-fought battlefield triumph echoes the historical achievements of heroes whose choices shaped the very foundations of the world. The question of where the imprisoning war fits within the vast chronology of Hyrule's history has sparked some of the most passionate debates among scholars and theorists in the field of Zelda studies. This temporal mystery, which seemed settled for many researchers, has been reopened by new evidence emerging from Age of Imprisonment, forcing a fundamental re-examination of assumptions that had guided timeline theories for years. The Great Refounding theory has long represented the most compelling explanation for the apparent contradictions between the ancient Zonai era and previously established Zelda chronology. This elegant solution proposed that the events witnessed in Tears of the Kingdom, including the imprisoning war itself, occurred not in the distant past, but in the far future. After all the divergent timelines created by various heroic interventions had somehow merged back into a single narrative thread. According to this framework, the Hyrule, founded by Rauru and Sonia, represented not the original establishment of the kingdom, but its recreation in an age so distant that the previous cycles of rise and fall had faded into myth. The advanced Zonai technology, rather than representing impossibly ancient achievements, would thus be the product of civilizational development that had progressed beyond anything seen in the intermediate eras. This interpretation allowed for the preservation of established timeline relationships while accommodating the obvious sophistication of Zonai society. The refounding theory gained particular strength from its ability to explain why familiar races and locations appeared in the ancient era without requiring complex explanations about evolutionary reversals or geographical impossibilities. If the Zonai era occurred after the events of Wind Waker, then the presence of Koroks represented natural continuity rather than temporal paradox. If it post-dated the various timeline branches, then the coexistence of Rito and Zora could be understood as the result of populations that had developed independently coming together in the merged future. Yet the competing pre-Skyward Sword theory has maintained devoted adherents who argue that the technological sophistication of the Zonai, far from indicating futuristic development, actually represents the height of an primordial golden age that preceded all known Zelda history. According to this interpretation, the Zonai were the original advanced civilization from which all subsequent technological development descended, their apparent superiority explained by their position as the source rather than the culmination of Hyrule's technological traditions. This ancient placement theory draws support from the mythic quality that surrounds Zonai achievements, the sense that their capabilities represent something beyond normal technological progression. The Sky Islands, the construct soldiers, the mastery of fundamental forces, all of these suggest not incremental advancement, but original innovation of the highest order. Proponents argue that only by placing the Zonai at the very beginning of Hyrule's timeline can their achievements be properly understood as the foundation from which all subsequent civilizations drew inspiration. The emergence of clear evidence within Age of Imprisonment threatens to settle this debate in ways that might surprise supporters of both major theories. The presence of a Korok character in the ancient era provides perhaps the most definitive piece of chronological evidence available, given what is known about the evolutionary history of this unique species. The transformation of the Kokiri into Koroks represents one of the most thoroughly documented evolutionary changes in all of Zelda lore, occurring specifically as a result of the Great Flood that defined the Wind Waker era. Prior to this cataclysmic event, the forest spirits existed in their original Kokiri form, maintaining the eternal childhood that characterized their relationship with the great Deku tree. The flood's aftermath required adaptation to a world without traditional forests, leading to their transformation into the small wooden beings capable of traveling between scattered islands. For a Korok to appear in the era of the imprisoning war thus requires one of several explanations, each with profound implications for timeline, placement. The most straightforward interpretation suggests that the ancient era indeed occurred after Wind Waker, supporting the refounding theory through biological evidence that transcends archaeological speculation. The alternative explanations, evolutionary reversal, parallel development, or temporal manipulation, strain credibility in ways that most scholars find difficult to accept. The Rito presence in the ancient era provides additional chronological evidence, though less definitive than the Korok question. The bird people represent another post-flood adaptation, their evolution from the aquatic Zora, driven by the same environmental pressures that transformed the Kokiri. Their well-established status as a distinct race during the imprisoning war suggests significant time had passed since their initial evolutionary development, further supporting the late placement of these events within the overall timeline. The implications of this chronological evidence extend far beyond academic satisfaction into fundamental questions about the nature of Hyrule's historical development. If the refounding theory proves correct, then the kingdom's history involves not linear progression, but cyclical patterns of rise, fall, and renewal that span incredible lengths of time. The ancient era would represent not humanity's first attempt at civilization, but perhaps its finest achievement, the culmination of countless previous experiments in governance, technology, and social organization. This cyclical interpretation transforms the way we understand the relationship between different Zelda eras, suggesting that apparent contradictions between games actually represent different phases of much longer historical cycles. The primitive societies encountered in some games would not be evidence of early developmental stages, but of civilizational recovery periods, times when knowledge and technology had been lost and were slowly being rediscovered. The potential presence of the Master Sword within Age of Imprisonment represents perhaps the most significant piece of evidence for definitively resolving timeline questions. The sacred blade's creation during the events of Skyward Sword has always served as a fixed chronological anchor, its forging marking the beginning of the sword's involvement in Hyrule's protection. Any appearance of the Master Sword in the ancient era would necessarily place those events after the blade's creation, eliminating the pre-Skyward Sword theory entirely. The musical evidence provided by Fi's theme in promotional materials has sparked intense speculation about the sword's potential role in the ancient conflict. If the spirit of the blade were to appear within Age of Imprisonment, it would provide unambiguous proof of the game's placement after Skyward Sword, while raising fascinating questions about the sword's activities during the intervening millennia. Yet the incorporation of the Master Sword into the imprisoning war narrative presents significant challenges for maintaining consistency with Tears of the Kingdom's plot structure. The absence of any reference to a second Master Sword during Princess Zelda's time in the past suggests either that the blade remained hidden throughout the ancient era, or that its presence would somehow invalidate crucial elements of the modern storyline. The delicate balance required to include such an iconic element without disrupting established narrative relationships demonstrates the complex considerations involved in expanding canonical timeline events. The broader implications of Age of Imprisonment's canonical status extend beyond timeline placement into fundamental questions about the relationship between mainline games and spin-off productions. The decision to make this Warriors game officially canonical represents a significant shift in how Nintendo approaches Zelda storytelling, elevating what might have been mere fan service into essential historical documentation. This canonical elevation carries both opportunities and responsibilities that distinguish Age of Imprisonment from its predecessors in the Hyrule Warriors series. Where the original game could indulge in crossover fantasies and Age of Calamity could explore alternative timelines, this newest entry must respect established lore while filling gaps that have existed for years. Every character interaction, every plot development, every revealed detail becomes part of the official Zelda universe in ways that require unprecedented attention to consistency and coherence. The integration of Age of Imprisonment into official canon also establishes precedents for how future spin-off games might contribute to overall series lore. Rather than existing as isolated experiences that draw from but do not contribute to the main narrative, such games could become vehicles for exploring historical periods, character backgrounds, or geographical regions that mainline entries lack the scope to address thoroughly. The temporal mysteries surrounding the ancient heroes aspect add another layer of complexity to these chronological considerations. This enigmatic armor, clearly of Zonai origin, yet connected to events occurring 10,000 years before the modern era, suggests relationships between different historical periods that transcend simple linear progression. The hero it represents, neither Hylian nor any other recognized species, implies evolutionary or hybridization processes that span incredible lengths of time. If Age of Imprisonment reveals the identity of this ancient hero or provides clues about the armor's origins, it could reshape understanding of how different eras within Hyrule's history connect to each other. The possibility that the mysterious construct figure prominent in promotional materials might be related to this ancient hero opens intriguing possibilities for linking the imprisoning war to events that occurred thousands of years later, yet still within the ancient past relative to the modern era. The construct soldiers that serve the Zonai raise their own chronological questions, particularly regarding the relationship between artificial and organic consciousness within their society. These mechanical warriors suggest technological capabilities that exceeded anything seen in subsequent eras, yet their apparent consciousness implies spiritual understanding that transcends mere engineering achievement. The timeline placement of such sophisticated artificial beings has profound implications for understanding the development of both technology and metaphysics throughout Hyrule's history. The resolution of these timeline mysteries through Age of Imprisonment will likely have lasting effects on how future Zelda games approach historical continuity and canonical consistency. The establishment of definitive chronological anchors could provide framework for more ambitious storytelling that spans multiple eras, while the integration of spin-off content into official lore could encourage more experimental approaches to narrative expansion. Whether the ancient era represents humanity's earliest achievements or its finest hour, the events of the imprisoning war will finally take their proper place within the vast tapestry of Hyrule's history. Through careful attention to chronological evidence and respectful treatment of established lore, Age of Imprisonment promises to transform scattered fragments of ancient history into a coherent narrative that enriches understanding of every subsequent era, while honoring the mythic weight of the legendary conflict that determined the very foundations of the kingdom itself. Among the many figures who populate the ancient court during the imprisoning war, perhaps none generate more speculation and intrigue than those whose identities remain shrouded in mystery. These enigmatic characters, glimpsed in promotional materials and hinted at in development notes, represent some of the most compelling puzzles that Age of Imprisonment might finally resolve, their true natures potentially holding keys to understanding aspects of Zonai civilization and ancient Hyrule that have eluded scholars for generations. The most prominent of these mysterious figures is the Hylian warrior, whose resemblance to Link has sparked countless theories about identity, purpose, and temporal relationships. This enigmatic fighter, whose armor and bearing suggest noble origins, yet whose presence in the ancient era defies simple explanation, represents one of the most intriguing anachronisms in the entire Age of Imprisonment narrative. His very existence raises fundamental questions about the nature of heroism, destiny, and the cyclical patterns that seem to define Hyrule's relationship with those chosen to protect it. The superficial resemblance to Link cannot be dismissed as mere artistic convenience or character design shorthand. The careful attention to canonical detail that characterizes Age of Imprisonment suggests that every visual element serves specific narrative purposes, making the warrior's familiar appearance a deliberate choice rather than coincidental similarity. Yet, the absence of Link himself from the ancient era, his continued presence in the modern timeline dealing with the aftermath of the imprisoning war, eliminates the possibility of direct temporal displacement. This elimination of the obvious explanation opens fascinating possibilities about the nature of heroic archetypes and their manifestation across different historical periods. Perhaps the warrior represents evidence of recurring patterns in Hyrule's history, the tendency for similar individuals to emerge during times of crisis, regardless of era or circumstance. The concept of heroic reincarnation, while never explicitly confirmed in Zelda lore, finds compelling support in the apparent similarity between champions separated by vast stretches of time. The warrior's equipment and fighting style provide additional clues about his potential identity and significance. His armor suggests Hylian craftsmanship, yet incorporates design elements that seem influenced by Zonai technology, implying either cultural exchange between the peoples or hybrid heritage that combines both traditions. This synthesis of technological and cultural elements mirrors the broader themes of integration and cooperation that define the Sage Alliance, suggesting that the mysterious warrior might represent the literal embodiment of the unity that the imprisoning war sought to achieve. The possibility that this figure represents a descendant of Rauru and Sonia adds another layer of intrigue to his mysterious presence. The royal couple's establishment of a bloodline that would eventually produce Princess Zelda necessitates the existence of children and subsequent generations. Yet these crucial figures remain absent from most accounts of the ancient era. The warrior's potential royal heritage could explain both his combat capabilities and his central role in the conflict, while his resemblance to future heroes might reflect genetic traits that manifest consistently within the royal lineage. The construct soldiers that serve alongside organic warriors throughout the ancient era represent another category of mysterious figures, whose true nature remains tantalizingly unclear. These mechanical beings appear to possess some form of consciousness or autonomous decision-making capability, yet their exact relationship to Zonai technology and spirituality remains undefined. The question of whether they represent purely artificial creations or something more profound, perhaps vessels for preserved consciousness or spiritual energy, carries significant implications for understanding Zonai attitudes toward life, death, and the nature of existence itself. The sophistication displayed by these construct warriors extends beyond mere mechanical functionality into apparent tactical intelligence and emotional responsiveness. Their ability to coordinate complex battlefield maneuvers and adapt to changing circumstances suggests cognitive capabilities that transcend simple programming. Yet their artificial nature raises questions about the source and nature of such intelligence. The possibility that they house transferred consciousness from deceased Zonai would represent a technological achievement of staggering significance, one that could explain both the construct's apparent intelligence and the mysterious fate of the broader Zonai population. The visual similarities between certain construct designs and the ancient heroes aspect create additional layers of mystery surrounding these artificial beings. The armor that transforms Link into an unknown species bears striking resemblance to construct aesthetic principles, suggesting possible connections between these mysterious heroes and Zonai artificial life projects. The implications of such connections could reshape understanding of the relationship between organic and artificial consciousness within Zonai civilization. Linalia's potential connection to the Sky Tablet writings represents a mystery that bridges the gap between individual identity and historical documentation. The Chamberlain's administrative competence and close relationship with the royal court would have positioned her perfectly to serve as chronicler of important events, yet the attribution of the Sky Tablet texts to her hand remains speculative rather than confirmed. The resolution of this question could provide crucial insights into how information about the ancient era was preserved and transmitted to future generations. The style and content of the Sky Tablet writings suggest an author deeply familiar with court proceedings and privy to confidential discussions between the royal couple and their advisors. The level of detail preserved in these texts implies access to information that would have been restricted to a very small circle of trusted individuals, making Linalia's candidacy as their author highly plausible, given her established role as Rauru's most trusted attendant. Yet the attribution of these crucial historical documents to a single individual raises broader questions about the nature of historical preservation during the ancient era. If Linalia did indeed serve as the primary chronicler of the imprisoning war, then her perspective and potential biases would have shaped how future generations understood these pivotal events. The responsibility of serving as civilization's memory carrier would have added tremendous weight to her already significant duties within the royal household. The background figures visible in promotional artwork and concept materials hint at the existence of numerous other individuals whose stories remain untold, but whose presence suggests a rich social fabric surrounding the main participants in the imprisoning war. These secondary characters, court officials, military officers, artisans, scholars, represent the broader population whose lives were shaped by the cosmic conflict, yet whose individual contributions remain largely invisible in historical accounts focused on the primary heroes and villains. The diversity of these background figures reflects the multicultural nature of the Sage Alliance and the kingdom that Rauru and Sonia sought to establish. Representatives of various peoples and traditions appear throughout the available imagery, suggesting that the ancient court was truly cosmopolitan in its composition rather than dominated by any single cultural group. This diversity speaks to the inclusive vision that guided the kingdom's founding and the practical reality that success required contributions from all of Hyrule's peoples. The question of other surviving Zonai beyond Rauru and Mineru represents perhaps the most significant mystery surrounding the ancient era's population. While the royal siblings are consistently described as the last of their kind, the vast scope of Zonai civilization suggested by archaeological evidence makes it difficult to believe that only 2 individuals survived whatever catastrophe befell their people. The possibility that other Zonai existed in hidden enclaves or distant territories could explain certain technological capabilities and knowledge that seem beyond the capacity of just 2 individuals to maintain. The potential revelation of additional Zonai survivors would have profound implications for understanding both the ancient era and the ultimate fate of this remarkable civilization. Hidden communities of Zonai might have contributed to the war effort in ways that remained secret even from the sages, their existence preserved through careful concealment rather than dramatic last stands. The discovery of such survivors could provide answers to questions about Zonai origins, capabilities, and ultimate destiny that have puzzled researchers for generations. The relationships between these various mysterious figures create webs of connection and influence that extend far beyond their individual stories into the broader narrative of the ancient era. The potential for romantic partnerships, familial bonds, mentorship relationships, and political alliances among these characters suggests a complex social environment where personal relationships intersected with cosmic conflicts in ways that shaped both individual destinies and historical outcomes. The hidden relationships between characters across different time periods add temporal dimensions to these mysteries that transcend the boundaries of single eras. The possibility that certain ancient figures might be ancestors of later heroes, or that specific bloodlines carry traits or destinies that manifest across generations, suggests patterns of inheritance and continuity that operate on scales far grander than individual lifetimes. The untold stories of these mysterious figures represent opportunities for Age of Imprisonment to expand the emotional and personal dimensions of the imprisoning war beyond the epic scope of cosmic conflict. The individual struggles, triumphs, and tragedies of secondary characters could provide intimate perspectives on how world-changing events affected ordinary people, caught up in circumstances beyond their control or comprehension. The ultimate significance of these mysterious figures lies not just in their individual identities, but in what their revelation might suggest about the nature of historical preservation and the relationship between myth and reality. The process by which some individuals become legendary, while others fade into obscurity, the ways that personal stories transform into historical narratives, the mechanisms by which certain details survive while others disappear. All of these broader questions about the nature of historical memory find expression through the specific mysteries surrounding these enigmatic characters. Through careful attention to these hidden figures and their potential significance, Age of Imprisonment could provide not just answers to specific questions about identity and relationship, but deeper insights into the human dimensions of legendary conflicts. The revelation of their true natures might transform understanding of the ancient era from a collection of heroic archetypes into a living community of individuals whose personal struggles and achievements created the foundation upon which all subsequent Hyrule history would build. In the quiet moments after great conflicts have ended, when the thunder of battle has faded and the dust of cosmic struggle has settled, there remains something profound in the smallest details that witnessed history's turning points. The fragments of information that scholars might dismiss as useless, the technical specifications of ancient weapons, the personal habits of legendary figures, the minor characters who moved through the margins of epic events. These seemingly inconsequential elements often carry the deepest truths about what it means to be human in the face of forces beyond comprehension. The imprisoning war, for all its cosmic significance and legendary status, was ultimately a human story, written in the choices of individuals who found themselves thrust into circumstances that demanded everything they possessed and more than they believed they could give. Each seemingly useless detail about their lives, their struggles, their quiet moments between battles, speaks to the reality that even the most mythic conflicts are shaped by people wrestling with doubt, fear, hope, and the desperate desire to protect what they hold dear. Consider the weight carried by those who transform distant legends into visceral experience through interactive medium. The developers who spent countless hours perfecting the way light falls across ancient battlefields. The artists who carefully designed armor that would never be seen except in brief cutscenes. The programmers who ensured that every enemy movement felt authentic to the story being told. Their dedication to details that most players might never consciously notice represents a form of reverence for the source material that transcends mere entertainment. This attention to the seemingly useless elevates Age of Imprisonment beyond simple adaptation into something approaching historical recreation. When players experience the weight of Rauru's decisions through careful character animation, when they feel the tragedy of Sonia's fate through precise musical composition, when they understand the complexity of Artie's moral struggle through subtle environmental storytelling, they participate in a form of collective memory that bridges the gap between myth and lived experience. Yet there exists a profound irony in how the most crucial information about legendary conflicts often becomes classified as useless by those who inherit its legacy. The tactical innovations that determined battlefield outcomes, the personal relationships that held alliances together during desperate times, the technological achievements that made victory possible, all of these essential elements risk being forgotten by future generations who see only the broad strokes of heroic triumph without understanding the intricate details that made such triumph achievable. The transformation of pivotal historical moments into entertainment raises questions about the relationship between truth and accessibility, between scholarly accuracy and emotional engagement. When the imprisoning war becomes a series of interactive battles, does it gain new life as a story that can inspire and educate? Or does it lose something essential in the translation from actual experience to virtual recreation? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing between these possibilities, but in recognizing that different forms of preservation serve different but equally valuable purposes. For dedicated lore seekers and casual players alike, the seemingly useless information about ancient conflicts serves as a bridge between the mythic and the personal. Learning that Lenalia managed complex logistics with quiet efficiency, while the cosmos hung in the balance, discovering that Agriston's intellectual approach to warfare complemented his people's traditional strength, understanding that Rafika's apparent aloofness masked deep emotional investment in his allies' welfare. These details humanize figures who might otherwise remain as distant as constellations. The ultimate tragedy of information deemed useless lies in how it represents the human cost of conflicts that transcend individual understanding. Every technical specification of Zonai technology represents hours of development by individuals whose names history has forgotten. Every strategic innovation employed during the war emerged from the mind of someone who faced impossible choices and somehow found wisdom in the darkness. Every small kindness shown between allies in desperate times reflected the fundamental humanity that persisted even when the fate of existence itself hung in the balance. When we speak of useless information, we often mean details that seem disconnected from immediate practical concerns, fragments that appear to serve no obvious purpose in contemporary life. Yet these fragments frequently prove to be the very elements that reveal the deepest truths about who we are and how we relate to the struggles of those who came before us. The seemingly pointless details about ancient conflicts often contain the seeds of wisdom that become crucial when we face our own impossible choices. In the end, the great gift offered by comprehensive exploration of legendary conflicts lies not in the grand revelations about cosmic battles, but in the accumulation of countless small truths about courage, sacrifice, and the persistence of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. These truths, dismissed by some as useless information, form the foundation upon which real understanding of heroism and humanity must be built. As we close this journey through the seemingly inconsequential details of the imprisoning war, let us remember that every fragment of information about these ancient struggles represents a life lived, a choice made, a moment of human experience preserved against the erosion of time. In honoring these details, in treating no aspect of their story as truly useless, we participate in the ongoing act of memory that connects us to those who faced the darkness and chose to kindle light. The ancient secrets finally understood offer rest not only to the characters who lived these events, but to all those who have wondered about their stories. In the gentle recognition that even the smallest details carry weight, that even the most obscure, information serves the greater purpose of preserving human truth, we find peace in the knowledge that nothing truly important is ever lost, only waiting to be rediscovered by those patient enough to listen to the whispers of history.